your book, which I have right here.
Nice.
Yeah, it's just such a beautiful book. It's so
Thank you.
well written. I really must congratulate you on how well it's written, you know?
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
really.
appreciate
It's
that.
been such a pleasure to I've written 4 books myself, so I, I know how difficult it is to write a book.
Yeah.
But this book is like you read it and you're not, it's deep stuff you're writing about, but it's so easily accessible without being superficial. So it's very beautiful. And once I
Thank you.
really, and I also enjoyed because I read it quite intensely over like 3 days,
Yeah,
and
you
that's
mentioned that.
yes,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
that's quite nice
Yeah.
because then you really get into it. Whereas if you only read a little bit, 15 minutes each night. So I really got deeply, deeply into it. And it was just so well written that I could just flow. I could just turn the pages and just be with the rhythm of the words. And I never had to say, oh,
Perfect.
that sentence is not very nice.
You know, it's funny you say that because that's how I wrote it.
Yeah.
I have that same sense of, oh, that didn't work, or oh, that, even when I go back into my own work, and I can be like many authors, critical of one's own, like any artist, right? We're looking
Yeah.
back on it, thinking I could have changed that or done that better or made that more fluid. And I go back into it and I read it, and I don't find that.
Yeah.
I don't find things that jar me, and I find it does have that flow to it
Yeah.
that I can appreciate. Even though I'm the author, I can still appreciate the fact that the words flow and it's got that sense to it. So I'm glad you experienced that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm quite curious then. Did you write it? Was it quite flowy for you to write it? I mean, were you in a kind of a flow when you were writing, or did you have to labor over every sentence?
Yeah, I think it's somewhere in the middle
Yeah.
of those two. There were definite times when I was really working on structure, because there's different kinds of elements in the book. It's not just continuous writing. There might be someone's story, or there's an exercise in there,
Yeah.
or a moment of pause, or these kind of pieces that break up a flow of work.
Yeah.
And where does a chapter begin and where does it end, and all of that. Those pieces at times, really needed to be thought through
Yes.
and felt a bit more chunky in its development. But when I would have a section to work through, let's say I had a piece of a chapter,
Yeah.
then the writing often it just kind of picks up its own sense of flow. Like as
Yeah.
one paragraph moves to the other,
Yeah.
that rhythmic flow, and anything that seemed to get in the way of that, I could feel it myself. And then I
Yeah.
would attend to that, somehow delete or edit or whatever needed to
Yeah.
happen. And that happened again when I went through the editing process with the editor. She would point out things that felt a little bit jarring, and I would go, yeah, that's right, there's something there. And then we would just work to make it flow a little smoother.
Yeah.
So there were times when the writing felt very fluid and natural, and other times when, yeah, I would go back in and really
Mhm.
work through something to make it have that sense of fluidity.
Yeah, but I think you're right. When you're working on the structure, you need to be more sort of mind centered. But then when you get into the writing of the action, once you have the structure there, then you can let it flow more. Yeah.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
so there's so much to speak about in this book, and we couldn't speak about it all because it's just about covers the whole human existence. I know, but
Everything you wanted to know and more.
yeah, yeah. You just read Leon's book to learn how to be
Yes.
a whole human being. But I mean, the book is called A Shift in Being.
And
And then
being,
it
yeah.
says the art and practices of deep transformational coaching.
Right.
So I was kind of thinking, where should we start with this book? Where are we going to start digging in? And then I thought, well, what the aim of this book really is, because you're a coach and you
Mm.
coach people, you do also more what you call transactional coaching. But I gather, I mean, transactional coaching being more like somebody comes to you and they have a goal, and then you help them reach that goal. You help them
Right.
get clarity and see what they want, and then you help them get there. But I gather that your heart is more in this deep transformational coaching, which is much more about reaching a goal as such, like I want to lose 10 kilos, or I want to earn more money, or I want to improve my relationship or something. It's much more a holistic looking at the whole human being. Am I right?
Yeah, looking at the whole human being, but starting at that very essential level of self, like really recognizing how and why we experience the world the way we experience the world. And then looking at, okay, so as we grow into more evolved or higher states of self and self-awareness, what really supports that growth journey. And in essence, it's a book about how we can support ourselves to attain self-actualization, right? Really starting at that essential level, noticing what's stirring at that level, how we make space for a greater awareness, the work that needs to be done to clear out the blocks, the limitations of mind that get in the way, and then ultimately the embodiment of these higher states of being, hence the title, A Shift in Being, as we work to embody these higher, more progressive states of mind and existence. Yeah.
Yeah. I find that there's a lot of people nowadays. Maybe I come across more of them because I teach meditation, and often people who come to a meditation class or mindfulness class, maybe they have those, they recognize there's something inside me that's longing for something. So maybe I encounter more of those people, but I think it's stirring
Mm,
a lot in everywhere, like a longing for something that sometimes we don't even know how to name what it is that we're longing for.
exactly. Yeah, I sense it too. And the students that come to the Center for Transformational Coaching that do the work are speaking to this exact thing. And they come in often to the program a little bit unsure. There's something about it that called to them. The book spoke to them in some way, and they come in, they can't put their finger on it, but they leave after 5 or 6 months with this radiant smile and the sense of, I can now speak about this which I'm experiencing, this normality really, which feels at times so dysfunctional, but really is such a normal journey for me. I can speak about it, I can name it, I can express it to others, and I feel a lot more, let's call it safety and security, because I now have this understanding of this path of human existence that I really couldn't before name. And yeah, it meets that calling that you're speaking about. It's growing in people. And I don't know how much work there is out there that really speaks to the journey
Yeah.
of this self-actualization. Like I think about a book like Power of Now,
Yeah.
Eckhart Tolle's well-known book.
Yeah.
And a lot of people look at Eckhart, who speaks from that very enlightened state of awareness, and his book just resonates beautifully with this high state of self-consciousness. And yet his personal experience was kind of a flicking of the switch, and overnight, like I'm in the suicidal despair, and I flicked that switch, something happened, and I became enlightened. And now I can speak from this enlightened space. But the rest of humanity is kind of sitting there going, yeah, but for me, this switch feels like
It's
a
not.
20-year journry. Like what, how do I navigate this? And he's speaking from this enlightened state as
Yeah.
though we just enter into it.
Yes.
Really, we don't. And that's, I
No.
think, confusing for some folks. Like, well, there's a lot more going on for me. This awakening thing is not like I put on rose glasses and look at the world. It's all good. Like it's not. Awakening is messy, and it can be tumultuous, and it can be doubt filled. It can be all these things, but no one's really speaking about that side of it too much.
Yeah.
And so hopefully the book too is able to just kind of lay out this
Yeah.
journey,
And
normalize that.
yeah, I think what's also very good, there's no, I mean, this is no religion. This isn't Buddhist or
No,
Hindu or
no,
Christian or Taoist or anything. There's never,
no.
it's never mentioned. It's just a normal human evolution, you could say, or a personal evolution. And
Yeah.
I think it's so interesting how so many people, they notice that I'm just not quite happy in my life, but everything's perfect. Like I've got a
Yep.
really good job. I love my family. I love where I live. I I mean, everything is from the outside. It looks perfect, but there's something in me that just isn't quite. And it's so difficult if you don't have any guides
Mm,
who can point you in a direction. Like people don't even know what that calling is.
yeah. Yeah. That can be very disconcerting for people. Like, what is wrong? As you
Yeah,
said, on the outside, it all looks good, and yet inside something feels off. And the religion doesn't seem to be solving that offness. Like many people do have religious backgrounds in various ways,
yeah,
but for some reason, the religion isn't necessarily resolving that inner tension or conflict or misalignment that they're experiencing. And yeah, and they do look around.
yeah,
And that's what I think is happening more and more, is that people are starting to look around, and thanks for the internet, we have
yeah,
access to these incredible resources from all corners of the planet that are now able to support the steps that we want to take more than we've ever had before. And that's why this flourishing, I think, is happening, is because there's this pollination that can happen of
yeah,
ideas across cultures, across borders, across religions, and people are finding their way into their unique communities and spaces in which they can have conversations and begin to experience things a little differently and
Yeah.
ask those big questions. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's all happening, right?
Yeah. Do you find that people come to you as a coach and they ask for um, maybe a more normal coaching question? Do they come to you and say, I'd like some help with reaching this particular goal? Might be a quite a concrete goal. Um, do you find that then you start coaching them and you start working with them, and then you together move into something entirely different? Does that happen a lot?
Not for me anymore. And I suspect that's because when people find me, they find me through the work that I do.
Okay.
And so they come in already, in a sense, primed, saying, I want to work with him because we're not going to be talking about the surface.
Yeah.
And because we're going to go into the deeper senses of self right away. And so we just kind of bypass that. So that
Yeah.
doesn't mean that they don't bring issues to the table that are of the surface. And that's the beauty about this kind of work. We recognize that the issues are still going to be there, the daily challenges and grinds and confusions and just wanting to get something done or finished,
Yeah.
those transactional goals. But that is not the end of it. It's only a doorway. Those become the doorways. The daily experiences become doorways to the recognition of the deeper experience, our own inner operating system, what I call in the book our self-concept, right? That
Yeah.
learned idea about who we are, that's kind of like our inner operating system. Once we open the door, we can begin to really look at that. And that underlies all the daily experiences that they're having. So that's mostly where people are ready for with me. But I have, looking at what students of the work are sharing, yes, they are still in a world where people will knock on their door. And one of the big questions that they have for me is, well, these people are knocking on my door asking for help with this thing,
Yeah.
this goal that they want to achieve. They're still living in the 3D world and they want to attain and have success and grow. But I'm called to this work. How do I handle this, Leon? I want to drag them into my world, but they're not ready for it necessarily. So how do I
No.
work with them? So there is that.
Yeah. Yeah. Because this is not necessarily, are you then saying that it's not necessarily for everyone? Not
Not
everyone wants to dig so deep into that operational system and change the whole operational system.
Oh, you're right.
Not everyone is called to do that, right?
No, not even close.
No.
Not even close. And even people who are presumably on what they would call themselves a spiritual path are often only willing to go so deep. They don't really want to get to the core. And a lot of it is, as you were speaking about earlier, life is actually good on an external level. I've got material things that I enjoy, and I've got friends and family, and I got a job that maybe it's not my ideal, but it satisfies me and it provides me with all this life that I can afford. And if I go down that path, and I really start to look at that deeper stuff, that might rock this boat. And I'm not sure. So what I'll do is I'll just dabble. I'll keep one foot in that world, not willing to let it go.
Yes.
And I will just maybe read a spiritual book, go to a workshop, do some yoga, and I will satisfy some of that desire to go deeper within myself.
Yeah.
But I'm not really willing to go the
No,
distance.
because it could mean that I look at my job and I go, no, that's not that meaningful. And it's certainly not purposeful. Or
Yeah,
this relationship that I have, it's okay, but actually it's not truly aligned with my values and my
got it.
purpose. And yeah, it's
And that
just,
scares people at
yeah,
some
of
sub
and
deep unconscious level. That scares people, and they
which
then
is totally
hesitate.
understandable, right?
It really is.
Yes.
It really is. This is the world that we've been taught to go for from a young age. So suddenly, if that becomes vulnerable to shake up, we're going to like, well, if not that I've been taught towards, what then what? And you're speaking about this place down there, Leon, with this potential, and I have no clue what that is. I don't know. I don't know. So I'll go halfway with you.
Yeah. Which is
Yeah.
also something to be respected, right?
Absolutely. This is
Yeah,
never intended to be a judgment about people. I've noticed
exactly.
people coming to this work they went so far, and then that was it. Then they went away.
Yeah.
But then 8 years later, there was a knock on the door again.
Yeah.
They're like, now I'm ready. So time becomes irrelevant, and
Yeah.
people's choices are honored.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And you
That's
cannot
it.
force
Yeah.
a process. You cannot force another person's process. Maybe sometimes it's so easy to be the outsider looking in at another person's life and say, you really should change that and that and that and that. But
Yeah.
that's not you. You are in no position to decide those things at all whatsoever.
None. None. Because the moment we do that, we enter into judgment.
Yeah.
And now look at the world that we live in which there's all these factions and partitions and divisions that are exacerbated because we believe that there's something wrong with the way the other person think, feel, experience, and
Yeah.
act. And I'm not saying that to excuse all behavior. I'm just saying that we end up very easily then in a position where we judge what other people are doing with their lives as though that experience that they're seeking is less than or lower than,
Yeah.
but our experiences are somehow appropriate and right. And
No.
that's always problematic.
Of course
And
it is,
so
because then we're just perpetuating the same that we see that leads to wars and
yes,
and division in a whole country. For example, you look at America right now, so divided, right? So if we do that, we're doing
exactly.
exactly the same thing.
Right, just on a micro scale.
Yeah.
And
And
we're
it's so easy
justifying
to
it to
do, isn't
ourselves.
it?
Oh, it's so easy to do.
Yes.
It's the hardest thing to outwork, really,
Yeah, it's a
is
real
to
trap.
how can you just be in a place of acceptance of life as it is, all
Yes.
life as it is,
Yeah.
and true acceptance of that. And again, that doesn't mean that every behavior that everyone does is something you say, oh, that's perfectly okay. It's with what is unfolding in this moment in our world and the lives of people around you, can you just hold that as it is and create, and this is the work, is to become the space yourself in which transformative potentials of the world are possible. In other words, be the space in which transformation is possible. But that means you need to do that work in yourself first and foremost, so that you become that space, that presence, that consciousness that in fact kind of uplifts and pulls all others into your orbit. It's not a force, like you said. It's not a demand.
No.
It's an invitation through consciousness and through energy.
That makes a whole difference what you said there, that it's not a force, it's an invitation, right? You prepare the space and the terrain around you, and then it grows in circles around you.
Exactly.
And you're also, of course, everything, I mean, our collective consciousness is also very much influenced by all these little human beings walking around. Every one of us, we add to that collective consciousness. So if we can do just one little part, and as you say, if we can keep our little part judgment free, then there's a lot gained there, and it's difficult work.
It is.
That
And the
level
whole
of
book is
acceptance.
actually the whole book is kind of pointing people to that. So if we're saying, it starts as, if you want to be a coach or not, it doesn't matter. I know it's a book that's called Deep Coaching, but the reality is it's saying to people, it's possible to be the space, to become the presence in which all of this transformative potential can unfold, right? It's totally possible. And you don't have to judge and still be effective in creating the world that you would like to see. You don't have to be blaming people and pointing them out and calling them out and canceling them out for their behaviors when you can still influence by becoming that presence. How do you do that is the question then.
Yeah.
Like if I'm not judging, if I'm not demanding, if I'm not my agenda coming into then what am I doing?
Yeah.
So
So
here's where the book comes in. This is how we
yeah,
begin to say,
exactly. So
okay,
let's
this
go
is how we
into
do it.
so let's go into some of the things. I mean, the book is much more than that, but it's actually only the last third of the book is these 9 practices, and then there's a lot more practices. But for example, one of the practices that you say is to slow it all down.
Yes.
That we need to that we live on such a fast pace that we aren't able to listen to ourselves, nor the other person next to
Nor the
us.
other person. Yes.
Yeah. So
beyond the surface level words. Sure, I heard that you said you wanted to go for dinner at 6 o'clock. I heard that. Yeah, that's just the surface level listening, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
There might be
But
a
really
lot more
listening.
under that phrase.
Exactly, because that's where the things are really stirring at that more soulful, deeper level that are also seeking expression.
Yeah.
But if no one appears to be listening for that, then often that's just kind of pushed back down by people. They just, well, they'll just meet you on the surface. Oh yeah, well, let's go for dinner at 6:30 instead, kind of conversation. How is the movie? Whatever it might be. We just keep conversation there. We're not listening more deeply. So the whole aspect of slowing down, it's funny. It's the first practice, and it is undoubtedly the biggest challenge for most people who come
Yes.
into the work.
Yeah, I
Coaches,
know. Tell me about
right?
it.
Oh my goodness. The world just calls to us. There's so many things that we're involved in, and we want to make things happen, and we're pushing and forcing and growing and all of this. Now, this is not every human being. I still recognize there are people around that take life nice and slow. But slowing down is just this kind of precondition to any kind of deep, meaningful inner work. If we're not creating space for that inner contemplation and the healing that we need to do to really grow our consciousness into these higher levels of awareness, if we're not doing that, then everything else just kind of falls away too. It's almost like without that, the rest of the work really isn't as possible. I'm not saying it's not possible, but as possible. There's never been a spiritual teacher that I've ever met that hasn't been spacious. You know, I've never met one running around, can't wait to get some more stuff done. Right? Right? They're always sitting there, very spacious and open and aware. And there's a reason for that, because it's kind of a condition for transformative growth. But you
Mm.
said it yourself, it's hard, right?
It's
It's
very
really
hard
hard to slow it
because
all down.
the structures in our society are not designed for that. And we live inside a societal structure uh, that we take part in. It's difficult to be on the edges and do something different, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's just it. We're pulled into it, it seems, you
Yes.
know, and now that we've got these wonderful phones that can call our attention in a heartbeat, that are designed for us to pull us back in like time and time again through something that we have to attend to, the mind never actually rests.
Yeah.
And then we see the world out there striving, and we think, I need to be striving. I need to go
Yes.
for it. I've got to go for it. I want to build the business of my dream, my heart song, and I got to get busy and drive to that future. So it's counterintuitive then to say, actually, the future that you desire, people often use the term like this 5D world. This 5D world is not a world in which we strive for goals. It's the funniest thing. It's a world that unfolds.
Yeah.
It unfolds. And that's such a different way of living into a world in which you are driving because of what you want to make happen and see as possible, versus a world that you facilitate the unfolding of.
Yeah.
Right?
So let me then ask you, now that we're talking about that, where does the place of so let's say that, okay, Leon, I agree with you. I like that idea of, instead of striving for my goal, let the things unfold, and be there for the unfolding, be present for the unfolding, and let it organically and naturally unfold.
Yes.
Is there then no place for goal setting
It's less goal setting and more, let's call it intention.
or
So
aspiration?
yeah, or aspiration, right? So what I look at intention is for me a very creative impulse. But there's also this element of beginning to understand that when we participate in the unfolding of life, we're actually partnering with life.
Yeah, it
So it's less
co-emerges.
this, yeah, it's less this idea that my will to create this thing must happen for me to feel good about myself. And until I create this business or thing of my dreams, I'm feeling less than in myself. So a big part of this is to show the world that I can and will make it to this place and actualize in ways that the world will say, good job. So it's a very different place. When you operate from intention, you're sort of saying to the universe, if you will, to life, listen, this is what I've got in my mind, in my heart. I'm going to put this intention out. Now, in a co-creative spirit, let's see what happens with this intention. How does life then meet it or not meet it? And can I be perfectly accepting of that? Can I begin to trust that this mechanism into which I'm putting my intention is conscious of the intention, but then is bringing life to me in a way that says, maybe you didn't think of this, but this is how we're going to then meet your intention.
Yeah. And then also as life starts unfolding and you are maybe more relaxed instead of striving so much, you might on the way you might change the intention because
Exactly.
life is showing you something else, and you're willing to be present to the unfolding and to listen to what life is saying to you, and you might say, actually that was not what I wanted, so you adjust the course. Or
Exactly. It allows for that dance. And if you can trust it, this is one of the practices too, right?
yeah,
Cultivating this immense trust. If you
yes,
can trust it, then you won't judge yourself or it if the goal that was the initial idea doesn't come to the fruition in the way that you initially envisioned it. Like a lot of coaches come to our work saying, I want to build this coaching practice, as an example. And yet it's never this linear, simple thing that they just go from here to this coaching practice. And then they find themselves in all kinds of interesting situations that have nothing to do with coaching. And yet they're able to do this work as they see you allowed life to just to take you into that community space, for example. Or
yeah.
in this one lady in one of my workshops classes, she says, I have a chocolate shop. And people just come into my chocolate shop, and sometimes half an hour they actually leave without buying chocolates. And I've thought about being a coach and setting up a business, but then I realized I just need to let people come into my chocolate shop and be a presence in which they can begin to speak to me. And maybe they buy a chocolate.
Yeah, but
See,
that's
it's such a
secondary.
different way, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
But she's trusting that somehow the way that life has put her, if she could just be present to the people
yeah.
in those moments, her deepest soul work can flourish.
That sounds really
Right.
beautiful. It almost sounds like
Right.
something out of a movie.
It really is, right? I was
Yeah,
thinking the same. That would be a good movie, right?
yeah.
Right. Kind of a little bit like The Way of the Peaceful Warrior with Dan Millman's classic book, where Aristotle was the garage mechanic, and
Uh-huh.
people would stop by the garage.
And he
See her
would,
in her chocolate shop, and they're getting a lot more than chocolates.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which kind, what that brings to me, it brings movies and what we're talking about, but this fits in completely. Sorba the Greek, that you also say in your book.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so tell us about how we can't force these things. Tell us about how the chrysalis and how Sorba the Greek tried to help it open to see the butterfly come out.
Yeah. One of the
And the
great stories of
philosophy.
life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just for those who are listening that may not know this, it's the idea that when the butterfly first begins to come out of the chrysalid, there's a struggle, an immense struggle. And if you're witnessing it, you might be kind of feeling like, oh, if I just can snip that strand, the wings will come free and the butterfly will do its thing much more readily. So in the Zorba story, it's that idea that he interfered with this process and then watched the butterfly proceed to actually die, wither and die. And learning that in that struggle, the butterfly is actually gaining a strength and fluid into its wings necessary for it to go on. And if we try to interfere, we deprive the butterfly of that capacity. And it's the same in life. Coaches are susceptible to it. Therapists are susceptible to it. Anybody who cares about others is susceptible to it. The idea that, wow, if I can just solve or fix your problem and make your discomfort and struggle go away sooner, that's good. Why? Because discomfort is bad. It feels bad. We don't like it. We must make it go away as
And
soon
it's
as
wrong.
possible.
And
And
it's
it's wrong.
wrong.
Right. So take a pill or take a shortcut and or do this thing, here's the thing you can do to fix your problem, and all will be well. But in transformative growth, that can't happen. And this is why I say, we're really allowing this unfolding to happen and starting to trust that even these struggles and challenges are part of the process, and we must just more like bear witness, hold space, bear witness, and trust that there is something incredibly valuable. And people who struggle too much without support, we know that they too can wither and die,
Yeah.
right? If someone's just endlessly struggling and just never feels like the struggle ends and they don't see any support around them, they too can feel like I want to give up on life, and people do.
Yeah.
So the beauty of the work that we're doing is saying we are there to support people who are struggling. It's not this detached space, but what is our role? How do you support struggle without just, well, here's the antidote, here's the advice, here's how you need to fix it, here's what you need to do. And how do we really allow people to be in the discomfort while also sensing our incredible presence with them, even as they go through that?
Yeah. And it's I mean, some people can do this work on their own, you know, some people can.
True.
But yeah, but it's so different doing it on your own and struggling. It's what is it? The no longer and the not yet, right? So you're
Yeah.
shedding your old way of being or thinking, or your values are changing, and all of a sudden you start looking at life in a different way, and it doesn't make sense that the way you were living before. You want something more out of life and out of yourself. But it's very painful to shed that old skin and grow into your new skin. And it's not the same to have to do all that struggle and all that coming out of the chrysalis and folding your new butterfly wings on your own, than
Yeah.
doing it with somebody by your side who's holding the space for you and saying, you know, it's okay. What you're going through is normal. And I'm here to hold the space for you to fold your wings out. And it's normal that you're struggling, and it's okay. Just that.
Yes, that's really in essence what it is. The normalization of it, the okayness of it, the rightness of it. And
Yeah.
sometimes, as you said, that's all people need to hear, to have them just, okay, so I can trust this.
Yes, and they need to
Yes.
know that this has been done a million times before
Right.
by millions of people, and they've all struggled, and most of them come out on the other side with new wings, or with a new.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's just that it's not something we talk about all the time. We don't get this in school. We don't get educated on transformative growth. So when we hit it for the first time, it's all this new world.
Yeah. Do
And
you
then we start
think
looking around, right?
do you think that many people, because it seems to be a special time right now, it seems like many people are having these big questions, and I imagine it's also spurred by, well, because life is just so fast because of all the technology and all the external demands upon us of making a fantastic career, living in extremely big and beautiful houses. And I mean, the demands of modern society in the West are very, very high, a high demand on perfection on all levels. And we're human beings, we're not meant to be perfect.
No,
So do you think
no.
that many of these people who feel there's something inside go to maybe a psychologist or a therapist of some kind, and that actually their problem is more spiritual than psychological?
It could be for many, yeah. Again, psychology has such deep roots in our culture as well, that for many people, that's a natural place to want to turn. Sensing, again, there's some dysfunction in me, and maybe a therapist will be a better avenue, or psychiatrist, whichever way. Um, but yeah, I think there's a lot of that going on. I'm not sure yet. I'm not totally sure. I can't speak to why so much. Maybe that's it. I can't really speak to the why of why they would go one place rather than another. But there is, I think what you said, a high, I'm kind of losing a little of my thought here, but a high, there is a high demand on people to attain and live into these ideals of our Western culture. But that's not just Western culture, it's also Eastern culture.
Yeah.
And when they start to sense that there's something alive in them that's much more than that, then there is a sense of disruption. Thankfully, there are more and more avenues to deal with that disruption. Coaching is one of them. Therapy is one of them. And what I love about psychology of late is that it's becoming less and less about the couch and Freud. And more are we starting to see forms of psychology that even reflect the work that we're talking here about today, kind of an awakened psychology.
Yeah.
Right? Where the heart is attended to, not just the intellect is attended to.
Absolutely.
Now, those people who have dysfunctions, real mental and emotional
Yes, and
disorders,
they're very real.
they're very real.
Yes.
They do well, perhaps, in those more structured environments where there's methodology that can really
Yeah.
be followed to support. And there's a lot of experiential evidence that says these work. And I
Absolutely.
get that,
Yes, me too.
right? But
Yeah.
I like to see this evolvement of therapy and this evolvement of psychology into these newer forms that are more heart and spirit based. And I think that's where the potential for all of us lies. If we can turn to these people more readily,
Yeah.
but it doesn't matter who they are, just accept that these people are here to support,
Yeah.
and that we, as you said earlier, we don't need to be alone.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this brings me into you have this question that goes through your book many times. It's mentioned, and this question is, who do you choose to be? And I know that you find this question very powerful, and I agree, I find it very powerful too. But when I hear the question, who do you choose to be? I think that often we don't know, because I know what I am now and I have a kind of an idea, but I'm not sure. So who do you choose to be? How helpful do you find that question to be for many people?
When people are beginning to get a sense that there is something called a beingness to themselves, what we call it a way of being. I don't know if everybody's even familiar with that term, a way
Interesting.
of being.
Yeah.
I just had the book translated into Portuguese for the Brazilian market. And the biggest challenge the translator had at the beginning was, he said, there is no word in Portuguese for being. No, and this way of being phrase doesn't exist. So there's a concept missing in certain languages, this idea of beingness. So if you ask someone who's got no concept of it, who hasn't connected with a sense of it, then yes, that question goes nowhere. In programs, I've asked people like that question who didn't have a concept of it, and they'd say something like, here's the question, who do you want to be in this situation at work? Well, I want to be kick ass. All right. Wasn't the answer I was expecting. Okay. But from their perspective, you want to be something, I want to be kick ass. Okay, great. It's a starting point. It's a starting point for the
Yeah.
conversation, whatever they can conceive of in that moment. So it's like, okay, so what does it mean for you to be kick ass? And what would it look like for you to become that kick ass person? And then it can kind of wind its way into this beingness awareness. So you have to be, as an asker of the question, kind of
Yeah.
aware where people are in their relationship to it. But almost whatever they say, you can work with. But it's most effective with people who do have a sense of this consciousness within themselves, this beingness, and that there's a quality to their beingness, there's a character to it, and that can change if they choose, even in a transactional conversation. Let's say, okay, go back to the work. I'm at work, I'm not feeling particularly good about myself. My boss is a bit overriding and demanding. Who do you choose to be in this situation? Well, I choose to be assertive. Okay, let's work with that. What is assertive? It's not the deepest of the deep, right? It's not yet them going into that soul level awareness of the essence of who they are and making that their lived reality, but it's a beginning.
Yeah.
And we can
Yeah.
start to
And
work with that. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. Yeah. And you have to meet people at the level that they're at. That's the only thing that makes sense.
Exactly. And once they begin to familiar with the journey of beingness, so anytime there's a journey into what I call embodied beingness, which isn't just the intellectual idea of I want to be assertive, it is the living embodiment of me as assertive or confident or peaceful, that I am that and that is me, and never the twain are separate. But normally what happens is people say, well, I would love to be more peaceful. Okay, great. Let's start looking at peacefulness within you. They come up with some ideas. They go into their week. They're peaceful for an hour. Then their child kicks the cat and they're not so peaceful anymore. And then they're not peaceful for the rest of the day. They come back to the session and they say, well, I was peaceful for an hour last week. I mean, really peaceful for an hour, and that's it. This thing is elusive, Leon. Help me out here. So the journey begins one of recognizing this ebb and flow of these states of being. But then we begin to look at, okay, so what really is at the core that needs to be looked at, attended to, maybe even healed, that is a barrier to your peace? And revisiting that and then expanding in peace. And so that contraction and expansion piece,
Yeah.
a little longer in peace. Okay. A little longer in peace. A little longer in peace as we
Yeah.
attend to that core stuff.
Yeah.
That
Like what's keeping you? What are the barriers? What is it that's keeping you from being, identifying those things that keep you from being in that peaceful space? No?
right, the embodiment of it, the
Yeah.
sustaining of it.
Actually
And that's
living it.
really the living it, that's the transformational journey. Like in a nutshell, it is to become the living embodiment of that which you claim to desire for yourself at a being level. And as people progress, those change the quality. So like it says, it might start out as I want to be assertive or confident or a powerful leader, but it ends up as people progress and get closer to soul consciousness. It's I want to be peace, I want to be compassion, I want to be love, I want to be the space, whatever it is.
Yeah. And Leon, do you think that one can be at the soul level, have the ambition about, I want to be peaceful, I want to be soulful, I want to be in true contact with myself, I want to be compassionate and spacious, and still have a really powerful career?
It's almost seems like those two bump up, just you saying them, right? Even your hand movement, like I want to have this and then I have that. Right? It's almost like, how do you have this and that at the same time? That's a real challenge. So you can feel where these things start to bump up, and people will work through those eventually if they stay committed to the path, because there will come a time when they recognize the inherent incompatibility of their value set. And then they'll say, it's time to make a choice. What I really choose to live with this incompatibility. And many people do. They'll just
so you
live
are
with
saying, they're incompatible.
They can be. Certain levels of consciousness just don't mix well. They just don't mix well. I think, I love Dr. David Hawkins' work on levels of consciousness, and just the spectrum from the lowest levels of hate and anger to the highest levels of love, compassion, peace. And it's like saying, can hate beautifully coexist with love? They just can't. And at some level, those are incompatible forms of consciousness.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But I mean, can you not be a powerful CEO of a big corporation and still embody what you're saying about peace?
Oh, I'm sorry. In terms of position, yeah. In terms of position, you can be anything and you can be anywhere.
Yeah.
That's the beauty. But usually people that have reached that state have no inner attachment any longer to where they find themselves. In other words, they could be a CEO, but that title is no longer a self-identifier. It's no longer a place from which they draw a sense of worth, of purpose, of place in the world, because they've embodied a higher level of self-consciousness and awareness. But look, I happen to be a CEO, and look at what I can do from this state of consciousness and awareness. Mm-hmm. Another guy may just be flipping burgers, but he's in that exact same state of self-awareness.
But they're not contradictory. Like you can still, like you don't have to relinquish your career goals and all those kind of goals. Like this comes back to what we spoke about before, the fear of going deep into these things, because you think then I'm going to have to relinquish many other things. But so that's going to be individual.
My experience is that you have to relinquish. Now here's where it becomes a bit of a paradox. You have to be willing to relinquish.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you ultimately in your life trajectory will relinquish, but there has to be an inner understanding at some point of complete surrender to life. And that in that moment of surrender, where you say to life, you and I are going to become partners on this fantastic journey, and I'm turning over this grip I have on life to you, in that moment, we relinquish everything.
Yeah.
And we gain everything in return.
Yes. And it's a very vulnerable place.
Yes, it really is. And this is why the people straddle two worlds, is because they just can't quite relinquish and
trust that much.
Right. That it'll be taken away from me, all that I've earned and cared for and nurtured for all these, it'll be taken away somehow if I relinquish. That's why life is. I can't really trust it.
Yeah.
So there's the key. It's not that we can't have it, so to speak, but we have to be willing to let it go and relinquish it in order to continue on our journey.
And then really be willing to see what will happen when I do, and to rest in the I don't know, in the not knowing.
In the not knowing, because life needs awakened CEOs.
Oh, absolutely.
And it needs awakened bankers and financial advisors. It needs all these people as awakened as everyone else who may not be in these high positions. Life is not demanding of a positional title, saying, well, we got to strip away from you these things. Now that still shouldn't hopefully say, oh, well, I can still be a CEO if I go on this journey. Great. I don't have to let go of my desire to be a CEO. Well, in that moment, you're still holding on to the desire. I'm
Yeah.
just saying life still needs CEOs that are awakened.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I sometimes reading articles or something in the newspaper about some CEO who I think sounds really, wow, that person's very conscious about many things. But then it must be so difficult, I think, because say the climate crisis or the crisis with biodiversity, the loss of biodiversity. I mean, our world is facing huge challenges that are extremely, I mean, this is us that have children, right?
Yeah.
And then I think, how do you make those? So you're leading this huge company who's producing all these T-shirts that we have to go out and buy, and you're you're being one of those engines that driving consumption. I think there are some huge dilemmas
There are.
today.
And the awakened CEOs at the level will start seriously questioning what they're doing.
Yeah, exactly.
They
And that's
will.
going to be very difficult because how do you do that? Because the structures are made for that. You have to make your
Yes.
company grow. And if your company
Yes.
doesn't sell more t-shirts, you are not a good CEO.
You got it. And a company that is in a lower level of consciousness will find a way to oust that CEO.
Yeah.
The beauty of it is that those CEOs may then go on to open an organization and start a company in which the values that they hold trickle down through. And we're starting to see that. I've read this great book called Reinventing Organizations, Frederick Laloux, where he's starting to speak about the teal organization, a kind of quasi-enlightened organization, which is developed so very differently
Yeah.
than the typical drive for profit, hierarchical organizations. So we're starting to see that there is this movement towards even people in these higher places saying, let's build it from the ground up the way we know it can be, rather than trying to convert an engine that's already on its own trajectory for
Yeah.
profit and growth and
Yeah, and
consumption.
that it's just not sustainable. Patagonia, the outdoor brand, isn't that Canadian?
It's a good question. I don't know.
I think it was
I don't know
originally,
where
at
their
least.
roots are.
I think it's Canadian, and
Mhm.
I know that they do. I mean, they're a very very successful, big company doing outdoor equipment of all sorts. And I know that they have, for example, when they go to these big mountain festivals, they bring a truck and lots of people in this truck who will, for free, I think, or for a modest charge, repair all your stuff. So say I have a Patagonia tent. So
Yeah,
instead of trying to sell me a new one, they will repair my old one.
yeah, yeah. So we're starting to see that kind of change away
Yes.
from, we just got to throw that one away and get you a new one because that would drive our sales,
Yeah.
to, sustainability.
Yeah.
And if
And
everyone in the organization carries that,
yeah, and I
ideal.
must admit that when I heard that about Patagonia, I was like, oh, well, next time I need something outdoorish, a new Gore-Tex jacket or something, I'm going to make sure it's a Patagonia jacket just because I want to support that kind of philosophy. So it's
Yeah,
not it's even a good business strategy in the long run, I imagine.
that's right. So yeah, though that fear that great things cannot happen in your life because you've gone on a spiritual quest is a misnomer. The other one that I hear a lot is, Leon, is there economy down there in that spiritual world? I'm used to the 3D world economy where we grow and get profit and we get, that's the economy I know. I grew up in this world. Is there economy down there? And I kind of laugh. I'm like, of course there's economy. Of course there's economy. It's an incredible economy, but it's true. It doesn't operate in the 5D world where this life unfolds. Economy operates differently than it does in the 3D world. And so you have to learn the new way of economy. And that's a stretch for folks too. Like how then, so we start to hear about things like the law of attraction. Okay. Now I'm not necessarily a big proponent of the way it's been presented, but the idea there is that we can begin to creatively manifest more of the things that we would like to have or see in our life. So that's an example of how economy, rather than a worksheet that takes me from A to B to C to D to E,
Yeah.
says there is another way to create in this world that uses our mind in connection with life and consciousness to begin to bring about conditions that are good for me.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we can learn that kind of economy, we can thrive in it.
Yeah.
But who's teaching it?
Yeah, I must admit that for me, there's like a big inside of myself, like a tension where I don't understand, or I'm not sure within myself how to embody this, that the planet needs us to consume a lot less. So, for example, all this hype about manifesting this, that, and the other is like, well, if I want to manifest material stuff, then I'm
Right.
still,
That's what I meant about the way it's been presented. It's not,
yeah,
that's the distortion
yeah,
of the concept, right? It's gone about material stuff. That's not at all. What it at the essence is presenting is that there's a capacity of mind that we have to partnership with life to bring about situations and circumstances that are beneficial for our well-being.
yes,
And that can lead us through life in a way that is safe, secure, and cared for.
yeah.
And if we can learn that, then we will be less dependent on the old economy way of kind of striving and driving to gain the things that give us a feeling of security. If I have the right house and the right car and enough in my bank account, I feel secure.
Yeah.
What happens if we start with, I feel secure,
Yes.
even without anything, and then watch how we grow from there? So that's what I mean is it's that different way of the economy works that we have to learn to be comfortable in. And most people are not yet.
And this brings us completely full circle, because what we started talking about is that I started asking you that it's like so many people have this longing and they don't really know either what it's for. And deeply, I mean, at the deepest level, every human being is longing to be happy and fulfilled and feel whole and feel
Yes.
connected, right?
Yes. Everyone.
Yeah.
Everyone. And we don't always get that. We see people all over the world who are engaging in horrific acts. And we think, how can you engage in such a horrific act? How can you perpetuate this upon people, upon systems? And yet it comes back to every single child born in this world seeks to be nurtured and loved and cared for, and to
Yeah.
grow into an adult that is of the same, so
Yeah.
that they in turn can give that to others. And if we can see that and we can support that from young ages for our children, what a world we'll live in. If
Yeah.
more children were truly loved in the perfection that they are and held in that space as they grow into their own wisdom and understanding, this world will be a different place.
In the perfection that they are, that's the key.
Right. Right. Not that we need to mold them or whip them into, right, through some idea of the ideal citizen.
Or the ideal
Right.
career.
Or career or whatever it is that we need to beat them into or drive them into. It's just to allow the flourishing of the child. And again, that requires the spaciousness that the child needs, the trust, the care, and the guidance. Doesn't mean we don't
Yeah,
put
of course.
limits. It doesn't mean we stand back and let them, kick the cat sort of
No.
thing. But, but to give that proper sense of care at the soul level that every child needs grows into an adult who's healthy at that level,
Yeah.
who's healthy at the self-concept level.
Yeah. And I imagine that because it seems like human beings, we have this need for growth. But I have this intuition that maybe this need that we have, because we're so creative. I mean, we're born with this incredible mind that's so creative, and it wants to be challenged. It wants to grow. It wants to create. And it seems like instead of creating and growing on the inside, we've projected that need for growth to the outside. So it's just grow the economy, more things, grow the things, have more things, have more growth things. And we can get the same satisfaction, actually a lot more satisfaction, by bringing that whole growth mindset to our inside and say and grow on the inside, right? And then it's not going to be so important to grow on the outside.
Boy, that's a perfect way to put it. That's a perfect way to put it. It just becomes so much less to grow the stuff on the outside. It will grow on the outside because the extension of that growth energy that we carry as we live into purpose and highest visions for ourselves and the expression of this, it's going to grow. But you're right. It's not, again, so necessary that it is this way, that I get my thing on the stock exchange and I have an IPO and whatever it might be that we are called to. It's just not. The importance just fades.
But do you agree that, do you think that human beings are inertly we have this growth, we have this desire for growth on one level or another because we
Yeah.
have this incredible mind, this very creative mind.
Yeah. And I've too noticed too that with men, men, just in my experience, I'm not saying this is some universal truth, but just that men seem to really hold to the external creative process. They really seem to, get their hands on something and make something and create something. And I've noticed that the men in my world can get very disconnected from their inner space because of that external need that is constantly driving them to build this or create that or make that, and then to get some sense of self-worth from what they could stand next to it with the fish kind of thing, or the rifle or whatever it is, like or the car, stand next to it, and then the glow of that thing shines off on them. So I really want to say to men especially, like, we are rich within ourselves, and when we tap into that, it doesn't mean we'll stop needing to create outside ourselves. It doesn't mean we're going to stop building the things, but it takes on less import, and it becomes far less connected to our sense of self and worth. We just start to create for the joy of it,
Yeah.
because the joy is inside, the freedom is inside, not because we're driven to it to feel good.
Yeah. And your relationships will be better than with your wife.
Oh yeah, I've noticed that. Right? I've noticed that. This is one of the things that I say happens a lot in my deep coaching intensive. We do get a lot of women through the course, and I'd say 80%, and there's almost invariably a divorce by the end. It says something you said earlier, where people start to really look in, they start to look and go, what is that I'm saying yes to that's really not aligned to the deepest part of myself? And that husband, that partner that I've been with, isn't keeping up. They're closed to these ideas and ideals that I am now espousing, that I speak to. They roll their eyes at me. And so, yeah, I say to all men, this is our time. This is our time to really go
Yeah.
within. And yes, your relationships in all levels of your life, with your children, with your partners, friends, it will all begin to evolve in different kinds of ways. Right?
Yeah, one of my friends who does quite similar work that I do with meditation and so on, she's more into the body. But she said, "Oh, Dorita, I've started becoming so honest." She works only with women, especially women in the what do you call it, the menopause. That's her specialty.
Right.
And she says to me, "Oh, I started just to become so honest, and I'm just telling them, what they have to do." And I'm like, I can't do that. And she says, yes, of course you can. I said, no, I can't. Because then I'd say to every third woman in my classes, you need to get a divorce. I can't say that.
Can't do that. Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Better not give that advice. Just hold space for
No,
them to make the decision for themselves.
exactly.
Right?
Yeah, the butterfly
Right.
needs to
Yeah.
do whatever it needs to do. And
What
it's
it
not
needs
for
to
me
do.
to
Right.
say, although I might think, oh, you should divorce him. You
Yeah.
really should. And you would
Yeah. It's a
flower
great
if you
example.
did.
It's a great example, because so much fear keeps people in relationships that are no longer right for them.
Yeah.
If I quit this, if I cut the ties, then will I be safe? Will I be secure? What will people think of me?
Yes.
What will happen with my kids if they have kids? All
Yes.
that fear comes rushing in. So it's better that I sit here and hold on to this that's not really working,
Yeah.
and hope it gets better. I'll do some inner work. I'll keep doing the inner work, at least to keep me in a place from wanting to run away.
Yeah.
And that's hard. That's a
It
hard
is
place to
hard.
be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is hard. But we can't tell other people. I so that's what I like a lot about your book.
No,
You're always
no.
so respectful of every single person's process is their process. Just as
Yes.
as we have had our process and are still in process, of course, we're all works in process.
Right.
And someone else might look at me and think, oh, she should so do this and that and that. But it's just not the place of someone else to come and tell
Not at
us what
all.
to do.
Not at all. And the beauty is, when we create spaces in which
Yeah.
people can relax, feel safe, and open up to their vulnerability inside and connect with that, they will make good choices.
Yes, because they're
Less from
connected.
fear, right? The fear starts to fade. And when the fear fades, they make powerful, right choices. And that's the beauty. That's why I say we don't need to advise people. We just need to help them open up to their highest truth from a fearless place,
Yeah.
and then watch them go.
Yes. Leon, that is a beautiful note to end on.